Morning, Kumlan and Ablat Gemara. We're up to Daf Chavtes. We're beginning Chesket Habatim. We already began, and we already established that a chazaka takes 3 years. That you have to reside on a property for 3 years, and plus you have to have a title. You have to have a claim that you either bought it or you gifted it to you. Otherwise, just being there 3 years doesn't prove anything. So we're up to the Gemara now. Right in the middle of the page, Chavtes Amar Aleph, Amar Rav Huna. The last word of the line is Huna. Right in the middle of the page. Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna then said, Rav Huna said, these 3 years that we just discussed have to be consecutive years. You have to be consecutive years. So in other words, don't do 1 year and then 1 year you're not there, 1 year you're there, because the Bava Basra can say, well, the fact that you weren't there for a year out of 2 told me that you knew that the property wasn't yours, but you knew that I wasn't around or I wasn't using it, so you moved it. That's why I didn't bother protesting. So it has to be 3 consecutive years. So the ma'arer, the owner of the property, can't say, or the original owner can't say, oh, I didn't know to protest. If for 3 consecutive years, the guy showed ownership, you should have protested. If anyone, my kamashma, what's coming teacher? What's I'm going to tell you? So in the mission, we learned yesterday, Tanina. We learned Chaskosan, Shalosh Shani, Miyam Liyam. That's clear. 3 years, day to day. Now, I would have thought that when it says Miyam Liyam, Fuki Mikutais, it meant the main emphasis of the Mishnah was not that it has to be 3 consecutive years, but it has to be 3 full years. You shouldn't do a half year and say, oh, it's a year. But once you do 3 full years, who says it has to be mamish consecutive years, maybe every odd year? Even if they're scattered, there has to be consecutive as well. Amar Rav Chama said, Umoidi Rav Huna. Rav Huna says it has to be consecutive years. Let's say in a field is concedes that Asre the Moivre Baga in these regions where 1 year they plant and 1 year they leave the land fallow because it's better for the soil not to plant all the time. So 1 year they plant, 1 year they plant fallow, 1 year they plant, 1 year they leave fallow. Fallow. Sorry, and in a place of Moivre Baga, it doesn't have to work there 3 consecutive years because 1 year they leave it fallow. It doesn't have to work there 3 consecutive years. So the Gemara. Now, big machlek is a shaynim. Okay, so 1 year you work, 1 year you leave fallow, 1 year you work. How do you make a chazaka here? So the Rashbam clearly says the chazaka is the 3 working years. So year 1, year 3, year 5. So it takes 5 years before you have a chazaka. Because when should he have protested? While you were working, but you only worked. If you only did 3 years, you only worked 2 out of the 3. He can say, "Well, I didn't protest. I only worked 2 years." So it has to be 1, 3, 5. Other Rishonim hold no. You can include the year that was fallow as part of the 3 years because that's the meaning of makom. So and not only that, when you leave it fallow, they don't just do nothing. They usually plow the field to get it ready for the next year, and then they don't do planting this year, plant next year. So you should have said something.
So where do we learn that the decline is based on actually working the field?
The whole thing, remember yesterday, the idea is that the owner saw you moving in as if behaving as if you owned the field. Should have protested. Because that's what he did. The idea was that since he didn't protest with his, he forfeited his rights. Why would he have to protest if he didn't do anything? Anybody can walk around the field. Yeah, but we're talking about a field. A field is meant to, but a field only has 1 primary use: planting and reaping and harvesting. Yeah, that's what anyone does in the field. If you go in the field and you put a tent to live there, that's a different story. I said I wasn't planning to plant. You'll talk about that in a minute. Overnight. The idea is that you have to show ownership for what the use of that particular field is. Anyone Shita, that also is quite obvious. But he told me that Abu is more in that case. No, let's see the Chiddush here. There's some people in that area that do leave the plant, the land fallow. Some people who work it. But hi, Gavin, you join those who don't. So Mount I would have thought Amalei, the Balbus would have said, if you talk to the reason why you didn't protest is because you decide not to work on the field because a lot of people do work on the field. You didn't, so I thought, you're minded to me that you don't really own the field. He said, if it was yours, you should have planted. He said, the reason why I didn't plant is because you knew you bought the field and you're trying to establish a chazaka. That's what you're trying to do. Because you're claiming you bought the field. and you know that after 3 years you lose a contract. So you have an interest in showing a chazaka. It's not, it happens to be. So he said to him, for the reason the guy counts is that, you know why I didn't work the field? Because nobody else is working the field. So if I'm working the field, I have to hire a guard, make sure that nobody steals or animals don't come roaming the field. One field, I have to hire a guard myself. It's too expensive. If we have 10 fields together, we join together, we buy, we hire a shmira, and that's economical. So that doesn't prove that I didn't believe I'm the owner. It just proves that I was or I like it, or you could say it's better for this field that I don't work it, because the soil then becomes richer. I don't rob it from its nutrients. So the Gemara, now we learned in our Mishnah, Cheskes Habatim. Okay, now you just came along, Rabbi, and said you need consecutive all the time. So the first thing the Mishnah said was Cheskes Habatim, Chazaka for a house. Now, a house is meant to be used by day and by night, especially by night, by day and night. So how is he going to prove that he was there at nights? By day, people see you. At night, nobody sees you. So why can't the Ma'arer, the original owner of the field, say, I went by night, there's nobody there, so why should I protest? Are you there by day? It didn't bother me, because I know you weren't there at night. So that means you vacated the house at night. That means you demonstrated that you knew that it wasn't your house. You were just squatting by day. How is he going to prove that he was there every night? The Gemara bought him to be Yodi Belayla, Yodi, nobody knows at night. Knows how you're going to bring evidence that it's your property consecutively. Amar Abaye, so Abaye answers, Man Masid Abatim Shivche. Who knows who lives in the house? Nobody better than the neighbor. They can see people go in and out all the times of the day and night. Shivche made the Yod be Mama Uvalayla. They not only know you by day, they also know when you're there at night. They can hear the screaming matches, they can see the lights going on and off. They know what's going on. Rabba says he's going to Osu Beit Trey. Now, the big machlekes are showing whether Rav agrees with Abaye, just giving another example, like that today they say neighbors don't know each other, or is it that the Rav disagrees with Abaye? And the fact that it says Rav Omar usually means that, because if it's a new thing, say Omar Rav. Rav Omar, they want to say that maybe he argues and he doesn't agree with it. Neighbors are not good enough because it's not consecutive. So Rav says you're going to also be today. You know how you can? There's only one way of doing it. That you can give Edis that for 3 years, every single day and night. The what called it? The Ditva was there. Or the Lekech was there. How? We rented it from him, but we lived there for 3 years. Now they are an extension of the Lekech. The fact that he rented it out to us, and we lived there day, nobody protested, not to him and not to us. So that's here you have your Edus.
So now you have the
Schwach Edus. Amalei Rav Yemel Rav Ashi Hani Noigin beEdus and Hein L'Chayda the Nagea beEdus. L'Chayda Nagea beEdus. Why? Because if they paid the rent to this Lekech, and it turns out to be the Lekech was gone if he never owned the land, that means they have to pay rent again to the real owner. Just too bad you paid the rent. That's between you and them. Go get your money back. But meanwhile, you have to pay rent to the real owner. So they have a vested interest in ensuring that the owner remains the landlord who's renting to them. So otherwise you would tell him, okay, your landlord lost the case. He's never the landlord in the first place, just one of these con artists. Pay the real guy. Amalei, so Rabbi said, interesting expression. These low standard Rayonim would paskin this way. The Dani, Hochidani, we talk about paskin that we would trust these Adim even though they already paid the rent. Mila Askini going to Kitty Agabase and haven't paid the rent yet. They're 3 years worth of rent they haven't paid. It's in the hand. The Amri Laman Leisvin, and they came to didn't tell you who should we give the money to. And all we can tell you is that we've been living here for 3 years. Now they have no vested interest because the money is in my hand, and whoever tell us to give it to, we'll give it to. So they won't have to give it a second time. There's a whole chakir in the Acharenim and a Shalorach. Are you in a gay be'edus where there's no money in it? No, it's in a gay be'edus because you have benefit. What if you have no benefit? Are you still in the gay be'edus because it's about me? What's the word negay be'edus? Is it because we think that you're lying? When are you going to lie? When you have a benefit from it. If you have no benefit from it, why should we trust you? Or negay be'edus like a gzeres hakosef. And a kodev can't get to edus, so you're a kodev it's latzmai, and you can't say edus. If that's the word, it doesn't matter. And one of the rayas they bring is from right here. Here, to them, there's no benefit. Then we say no longer negay be'edus, even though they're talking about themselves. We are the ones who rented from this person. That's the entire age revolves around them. Anyway, so, and I can't remember how the others for this Gemara to say, well, it's not a raya. Amma mazut, unless they're saying that's really more about the landlord than about themselves, even though they're talking about themselves, but that's not the gate to the Edis. What's the gate to the Edis is this guy was a landlord for 3 years for day and night, and this is just a manifestation of that. It's not really what the Edis is. Amma Mazutra comes along Mazutra and says, Mazutra is continuing the discussion, or he's on Abuna, or he's saying Haminu. He's saying, if he toin and he says, if the landlord comes along and says that, okay, you need 3 consecutive years and so on and so forth. And he says, the landlord, if the original vendor says, bring me a raya, you were there for 3 years. Now that we say you need 3 consecutive years, the landlord says, bring me a raya that you're talking there for 3 years, day and night. And in fact, like the Lashon says, and you didn't miss a day. You didn't miss a day. You were there 3 years, day and night. Remember, you're trying to establish a chazakah because you know that you bought the property and you know that it can be matter and you know you might lose the contract. And Taki did lose the contract. Otherwise, there's a whole discussion of going, no discussion. Prove it that you were there for 3 years, day and night. So Bahuna says that only if the ma'ara makes that taina, we are not going to say it at all. We're gonna, if this guy says, look, I've been living for 3 years, we're happy. But if the original landlord says, prove it to me, then he has to go ahead and bring evidence. That when isn't it a valid taina? You know what's not a valid taina? You have these peddlers who travel around. Remember, we learned that Yeshua made the kana that they can go traveling around. It's a good thing to help people out, and the women should look beautiful, but they're not home. So what's going to happen if the landlord says, "Hey, that's your profession, but you went there 3 days a night, so you'll never be able to establish a chazakah." So in this case, we're made the Afghan the late turn tanin and lay. Sorry, we're talking about the landlord is a reichel. Not talking about the landlord is a reichel. So the landlord can't say, that the landlord, is the landlord. If the landlord is a reichel, sorry, the landlord. If the landlord is a reichel, then this guy's smart. The guy goes for 3 months at a time on business trips. So during the 3 months he's gone, he lives there, and he knows when he comes back, he moves out of the house, and the landlord walks his house. So you see what maintenance he needs. Nobody's there. So the landlord doesn't know to be meichel. Then we, the bezin, are going to, on his behalf, we're going to be taininin over here. We're going to tainin on his behalf and say, hey, prove you were here when he was gone as well. When he was in town, also prove that you were here the whole time. Prove that you were here 3 years consecutively. Because the guy he doesn't know to be meichel. He has no idea to be meichel. So the Gemara, who said that you need 3 years, day and night, consistently, is made that in certain kind of properties you don't have to be there at night. Days are sufficient. For example, in the stores of mechuzah, there are some people who live there. People like you have these milk bars that they live in the back of the store, but you have plenty of stores that nobody lives there. So a store is only open during the day. At night, it's not open. So therefore, all he needs to do is prove that he was there 3 years by day, and that's sufficient chazak. Even though Huna said you have to be the Yom B'Laila, but not in this case. The Yimam Ma'avida, the Laila Lavida. It's only meant to be used by day, not meant to be used by night. So in this case, chazak of the day is sufficient. Rami Bar Chama, Rav Ukva Bar Chama, 2 brothers, Zovi Nahi Amsa, they once fought together. This maid, and they made some kind of a deal. Bahadi Hadodi. Madi Stamish Body Shaina Shlishin. Remember how Vodim is like bottom. So Chazak of 3 years. One of them used the odd numbers, 135, another one did 246. 246. Now, initially, the Gemara thought, why did they make such an arrangement? Because they didn't trust each other. These are 2 brothers. They didn't trust each other, so they didn't want you to have a chazakah. If you would have 3 years and I would have 3 years, at the end of 3 years, they'll say, you bought the Eved yourself. I had it for 3 years, and nobody complained. So therefore, they didn't trust each other. They alternated. But what happened was a third party came along and said, nothing, eat it and said, hey, that Eved is mine. You never bought it legally. Also, they came before Rava. He said to them, my time he said the Rabbi said to them, why did you guys alternate years? Because you don't trust each other. You don't want you don't want either one of you to have a chazak. No, if there's no chazak, nor do you have a chazak legabe that person. So if that person brings a raya that the Eved used to be his, how are you gonna? You have no proof if you don't have a shtar. There's no chazak, there's no chazak. Says the Gemara. We don't say this. Ella the cost of itra. They didn't, when this arrangement that these two brothers had was verbal. But if they wrote an itra, which is a star, if they wrote an itra star, not talking about buying the Evid now, because that they lost. Even according to them, that they had a star, they lost it. We're talking about the division, this arrangement. You have it 1 year, I have year number 2, you have 3. If they made a star, an itra, then it has a coil. Because of itra, coil easily has a coil. Big machlek is a shaynim. So how long is this chazaka? According to some of the shaynim, the moment you wrote that star has a coil much more than just squatting, and therefore the balabas should have been meicha. If he wasn't meicha, he loses it straight away. Forget 3 years. Remember we had that cheskas tashmish according to many Nishayim. You don't need to wait 3 years. If I used your wall, I don't have to have 3 years to prove that you gave me permission. 5 minutes, because nobody lets tashmish 5 minutes. So according to those Nishayim, sitting over here, if there was a coil from a star, the real said, "What do you mean? You have an arrangement with my Evid? What's going on over here?" Because there's a coil. So the chazaka then not 3 years, but straight away. Others say the chazaka is 3 years, but the chiddush here is the 3rd year is a star. In other words, if they already had a chazaka of 2 years, and then you have the star that comes out by the 3rd year, that is equal to 1 year. It's the coil of a star is equal to 1 year, so that's considered 3 years. That's the chiddush here. Amar Rava says, Rava, what happens? Okay, you took over a field, and we said before the chazaka is when you plant the field. If you don't plant the field, there's no chazaka on that year, according to those who say no chazaka. If you do nothing, what happens? It's a big field, but most of the field you planted, and part of the field you didn't plant. So does a chazaka work for the entire field or just the area that you planted? So Amar Rava, if you use the entire field except one little quarter of a kava, small section, even you would think such a small section should be dragged along with the rest of the field, it should be tuffled to the rest of the field. There's no chazaka on that base rate. When is that talking about only that little section is shaykh to be planted and you didn't? So that shows that you don't have any ownership over that base rate. I have a lav bazrihi, but if it's not a bazrihi, Kondale is kind of agavad. But if it's not a bazrihi, then he is kind of, that's why it's rocky and you couldn't plant it, then it's tuffled to the rest of the land. Maskiv lo Rabbi, but Abaya son Rabbi said, I don't agree. So according to you, that you're telling me that since he cannot plant it, there's no way of showing bailers, and therefore he had no breda, and that's why he gets dragged along the field. So if the entire land is rocky and hilly and it's not really meant to be planted, but how is he going to show his chazaka? No, but you'll tell me, you have other uses. Put your fruits there to dry. It's rocky, you can't plant. Put the fruits to dry. Let your animals wander about it. Do something to show ownership.
You say the same thing in a house. You have to use every room.
No, because no one says that, because it's one house. It's one house. The field it's artificial. Why is this field end of here mine and this field becomes yours? Because it's what Sadna the Arachadu, the whole world is one piece. So we say by a field, that's how it works. So you have to show Bava Basra the field. Hachinami. Look, even that little section of the field, he should have used. Okay, you couldn't plant. You're trying to establish a chazaka. You should have made other use out of it. For example, he should have brought his animals onto it, or he should have placed fruit to do something with it to show Balabatas right. If he didn't, you forfeited. Not like Abhuna Sure. Said a person said to his friend, "My boy is behind base. What are you doing in my house? I bought it from you. I bought it from you, and I also lived there for 3 years. So I has a taina, the chazaka with a taina. Malay, he said back to him, I was in the inner houses. This is one of the longest riffs in the Gemara, right here in the Gemara. So there's the riff is one of the longest riffs on this Gemara, and the riff brings everything. Very seldom you have the riff that goes into pshat. It's halachas. But over here he gives 2 pshatim and how to learn his Gemara. He goes to town, whatever. Very nice. I'll give you a go pshatim. His second pshat, what she likes better, but the Rashbam and the Hashem here don't learn it. The Rambam learns it, and that is, the Balabas says to him, the day that you claim that you bought this field from me, I was some other neighborhood altogether. I wasn't here. How can you claim that you bought it from me? So I'm not disputing the chazaka. I'm disputing your taina. I wasn't even here. So you're left with the chazaka without a taina. A chazaka without a taina is garnished. So the question is, who has the burden of proof? Does the lekech have to prove that no, the balabas was here and I bought it from him, or does the original landlord have to prove that he was not here that day And that's going to be Machlekes Rav Nachman. That's how the Rif likes to shop. But I would the Rashbam and the other Shayim on this Gemara learn differently. They learn no. He says, I was in the inner house. You did. It's a street or it's a chutzah, but I could have walked out one way and the other way. But I used to walk out through your house all the time. So I used to use the chutzah that you claim is yours. I used to use it. So I never left. And just because I allowed you to stay doesn't mean that I gave it up because I was still involved. And that's the machlekes. So who has to prove what? So the cave definitely was there 3 years. Nobody disputing that. It's the ma'ared who's saying, but I never gave it up. Another big machlekes we're showing him here is, does the ma'ared have to bring edus that the field once belonged to, this house once belonged to him? Some of the showing him say that this mother must be talking about that ma'ared has proof that he once lived there. If the ma'ared doesn't, then the lekech has a migut. And this is the strongest kind of migut called pesha asa, pesha hit. The lekech could have said, it was always my field. He never had to. If the original landlord had never, there's no proof that the field ever belonged to him, then the lekech can say it was never yours. It was always mine. But by him saying it was yours, pesha asa, but pesha hit it, then there's no shaila. We believe the lekech. This whole Gemara is talking about where the matter has no eidim delegacies. That's one version, and the other version is pukvaket. If the matter has no eidim, it wouldn't be a machlekes. Of course, we believe the lekech. Pesha asa, pesha hit it. He incriminated himself, but right away he found a way out. We're talking about here the matter does have agent, but he wasn't meicha, and this is and his tiny is that didn't have to be meicha to walk through your property. So the Gemara said, here he is. Also the Kamei of Nachman came from Nachman. Amalei said to him, Zil Beroir Achiloscha. Nachman paskin to the lekech, prove what you ate. Prove that you have a chazak here for 3 years, and prove that you have a chazak here for 3 years. The owners approve, the burden of proof is on you, the lekech. So who is Rava calling the Maitzi here? The original owner. Because since this guy was there for 3 years, he is now the Muchzik. The original owner is the one who's Maitzi, wants his field back. Maitzi is the landlord, the owner, the original owner has to bring a raya. Okay, tomorrow it says, so Nachman says that the Lokech has to bring a raya. The Lokech bring a raya. And Rava says that the original landlord, the Morakama, has to bring a raya. So this is a proof for case of another case. The what's that? The guy said to his friend, the vendor said to his friend, I bought many properties of this rich family called Barsisin, and for this person, I'm selling that to you. Wrote the contract, the field of Barsisin, I'm selling to you. Now, there's one field they can have a dispute about where the owner is going to say, "This we call this field Barsisin's field, but it never really was Barsisin, just by name." And Shaili, another guy said, "No, it's included in the lekech." Says, "No, I that field. In fact, that's why I bought all these fields. I wanted that particular field, and it's Barsisin. So it's called Barsisin. So who has to prove what? Is it the lekech? Or is it the Meicher? The Lekech to prove that it's Takamamish Barsisin's original field, or the Meicher that the only reason why it's called Barsisin isn't by name." So and here we have Rav Nachman saying, "Don't forget." Who out of the land that was called Barsisin, he said to him, So the vendor said, "Hey, this field was called Barsisin. He created a Barsisin. It's called Barsisin, but it's not really Barsisin's field." Also, the Rav Nachman, it came from Rav Nachman. Now, previously, Rav Nachman said that the Lekech has to bring a raya, and over here he said, "Ukmi b'yo Lekech." He said, "Lekech, you keep it, and you, the balabas, you have to prove that it's just by name rather than taka belonging." Don't forget what he said before. Omalei Rav, and here now before Rav said that that the landlord has to bring a raya, that the vendor would have to bring a raya. Omalei Rav, Dinah was going to raya. No, the lekech has to bring a raya. Kasha the Rav, Kasha Nachman. It's not glattas. That's filling in. The Rav like Kasha, two very different cases. Okay, Hossam over there, Moiche Kai say over there, the Moiche is in the Chassim, and therefore it's Lekeach who has to prove it. The Moiche is the one that has one of the Chassim. He's about to give it over. Remember, who's living it right now? The vendor. And he's selling Barsisin's properties. So therefore, the Moiche is the one who's holding on. He's the Muhzik right now. The Lekeach is trying to be Moitzi. So the Lekeach is the Moitzi. Over here in the case before, there the Lekech is living there for 3 years. The original owner wants to take the field. So who's the Maitzi there? The original owner is the Maitzi. So therefore he has to prove. Over here the Lekech is living in the Chassim. So the Lekech is the Mulzik. The original owner is the Maitzi. So he has to prove that he was there all the time. Rav Nachman Lekash, the Rav Nachman before Paskin that the Lekech has to bring it out, and here he says the vendor. Even the Amalei the Beibasis, since he said that I'm selling you all the fields of Basisin, all the fields of Basisin. Umikai the Basisin, and this field is called Basisin's field. Nu alei the day Ramir Ligaluya. So the vendor has an achrayis to prove the law of the Basisin. He has to prove that this field is Basisin. Because he said all Basis's field, and this field is called Basis's field. So Mepashtas, it is Basis's field. You're coming along and saying, even though it's called Basis's, you're the one who's changing the rules of the game. You have to prove that you're right. But in the case of that we had before in Gemara, when the guy lives up 3 years, lo Chazak is no better than the whole reason for Chazak is people lose their star after 3 years. Yeah. So the Chazak is no better than the star itself. So what would be forget Chazak? There'll be a star. Mila, I mean, like Kaim Star. If a guy says, I have a star, this field is mine. So what you have to Mekayim every star. That's the thing. Every star has to be Mekayim. Mila, I mean, like Kaim Star. Go ahead and prove the authenticity of the star, then you can keep the thing. So the Chazak is no better than the star. The Chazak is a substitute for the star. People don't anamas die the star after 3 years. So we say have a Chazak. No. So just like the star, you would have to prove. So Chazak also, you have to prove that you're solo there for 3 years. Interesting, Machlek is a shaynim, and it's interesting. I don't know yet what the rule is. Who the Allah is like Rav Nachman or Rava. Now those are shaynim say Allah like Nachman because Rava was a Talmud of Rava, and ain't poskim like a Talmud b'mokim Rav. And that those who say Allah like Rava because you always pass from like the Achron versus the shaynim. So which rule trumps which rule? You know, a Talmud versus a Rebbe. How does that work? I don't know what the rule is. Okay, continue tomorrow, Mitzvah Shem.